Okay, let's unpack this concept of black swans, something that probably feels more relevant than ever.
Mm-hmm. Definitely seems that way.
We're taking a deep dive into an idea that you, our listener, flagged with a fascinating set of materials, everything from your own notes to articles and, well, the cornerstone, Nassim Nicholas Taleb's The Black Swan.
A really impactful book.
Absolutely. Now, our aim here isn't just to acknowledge that, crazy things happen.
Right, it's more than that.
We want to truly grasp what black swans are, why they're so significant, and most importantly, what practical steps you can take in a world shaped by these unpredictable events.
Yeah, the actionable side is key. It's interesting because we all have a sense that big surprises happen, but Taleb gives us a really sharp way to think about them.
How does he define it exactly?
He says a black swan has three main things going for it.
Yeah.
First, it's an outlier away outside the norm of what we expect.
Okay, outlier. Got it.
Second, it has a huge impact, a massive effect.
Right, not just a small blip.
And third, this is key, we only think we could have predicted it after it's already happened. Hindsight bias kicks in hard.
Ah, the classic I knew it all along feeling.
Exactly. We become great storytellers after the fact, which can be really misleading. As Taleb puts it quite directly, our world is dominated by the extreme, the unknown, and the very improbable.
Improbable according our current knowledge. That last part really sticks with you, doesn't it?
It really does. It highlights our limitations.
We operate with our assumptions about what's possible, our neat little models, and then wham, something completely off the radar changes everything.
Yeah, history's full of examples.
Totally. Think about how Christianity rose in the Levant. At the time, Roman historians barely gave it a passing glance. Who would have guessed that?
Just a small local movement, seemingly.
Right. Who'd predict it becoming a major world religion? Or, fast forward a few centuries, the astonishing speed at which Islam spread.
Another huge transformative event that wasn't really on anyone's forecast.
Exactly. Historians like Georges Duby were just, well, taken aback by how quickly established cultures were transformed by these unforeseen forces.
It really makes you rethink how history unfolds.
So the initial insight for you, the listener, is maybe to recognize how often history pivots on these totally unexpected game changers.
Yeah, and an interesting consequence of this is how history often seems to be driven by these very events that blindsided everyone at the time. It wasn't the predictable stuff that caused the biggest shifts.
Which leads us to a really useful distinction Taleb makes, right? This mediocristan versus extremistan idea.
That's right. These aren't just academic terms. They describe fundamentally different ways things play out in the real world.
And understanding which one you're in has big implications for, well, everything. Your expectations, your risks.
Huge implications.
All right, let's try and get a handle on that.
Yeah.
Mediocristan. As I understand it, that's the realm of the pretty predictable, the average.
Exactly. Think about things like human height or weight. If you gather 1,000 people, then add one more person who's exceptionally tall.
It doesn't really shift the average much at all.
Precisely. The impact of any single data point is capped. It's limited. Taleb uses a great example of daily calorie consumption.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
Even if you have a massive feast one day, like a huge holiday meal, it's not going to drastically alter your total calorie intake for the entire year or even the month.
It just gets absorbed into the average.
Right. The key insight here is that in mediocristan, the collective outcome isn't really swayed by any single event. The law of large numbers applies quite well.
Okay, predictable, averages rule, single events don't matter much. That's mediocristan.
You got it. But then we have extremistan.
And this is where things get wild.
This is where things go a bit crazy, yeah. Here, individual events can have a massively disproportionate impact. Think about wealth.
Okay, like one billionaire compared to everyone else.
Exactly. Or book sales.
Yeah.
A single runaway bestseller, like a Harry Potter, can outsell thousands and thousands of other books combined.
Right, it's not an even distribution at all.
Not even close.
Yeah.
It's a real winner-take-all kind of environment. One data point can completely dominate the total.
So the average is almost meaningless in extremistan.
Pretty much, yeah. The average wealth isn't very informative if one person holds 90% of it.
Okay, so the key insight here for you, the listener, is maybe to identify if your work, your interests, your investments,
Yeah.
do they operate more like mediocristan or this winner-take-all extremistan?
That's crucial, because if you're an extremistan, standard forecasting and risk assessment based on averages, well, they might be dangerously inadequate.
You'd need a totally different approach.
Absolutely. It demands a different way of thinking about risk and opportunity.
So I'm curious, just thinking aloud here, for you listening, maybe pause and consider. Any areas in your own life, work, investments, hobbies, where the impact of one single event could just dwarf everything
It's a
else?
really important question to ask yourself.
Because, as your sources highlight, knowing which of these lands you're operating in is crucial for setting realistic expectations and managing risks effectively.
Definitely. If you're in an extremistan-dominated field, but you're making decisions based on mediocristan-style predictability,
You could be in for a rude awakening.
a very rude awakening. And this brings us directly to why we struggle so much with black swans.
Okay, why are we so bad at seeing them coming?
Well, partly because we tend to apply the logic of mediocristan, the world of averages,
Mm.
to situations that are fundamentally extremistan. We focus on what we know, what's happened before.
What we can easily measure and analyze? The comfortable stuff.
Exactly. The known knowns. But black swans, by their very definition, are outside of that realm of regular experience. They're the unknown unknowns, or at least the things we think are impossible.
And our own minds work against us too, right? With the narrative thing.
Oh, massively. This is compounded by something Taleb calls the narrative fallacy.
Explain that one a bit more.
We humans have this deep-seated need to create stories, to find cause and effect relationships, even when things are largely driven by randomness. We want explanations.
That's so true. We always want to know why something happened, even if the underlying reason is just, well, it just did. Random chance played a huge role.
Right. Taleb says, narrativity comes from an ingrained biological need to reduce dimensionality. It's like our brains are hardwired to simplify the messy past into neat little stories.
And we usually build that story after we know the outcomes.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Which makes the past seem far more predictable than it actually was at the time. It's almost impossible to look back without being influenced by what we know now.
So a practical takeaway here for you listening is maybe to be wary of overly neat explanations for past events, especially big successes or failures.
Definitely. They might mask the role of randomness and make you think the future is more predictable than it really is. It gives you a false sense of confidence.
And this leads to another trap.
Yes, this need for narrative, this oversimplification, leads to another pitfall. The ludic fallacy.
Ludic. Like games.
Exactly. It's the mistake of taking the well-defined rules and probabilities of games like what you see in casinos with dice or cards and applying them to the messy, ill-defined uncertainty of the real world.
Ah, okay. So we treat life like a game of roulette, but the rules aren't actually clear, and the wheel might suddenly sprout wings.
That's a good way to put it. Games have clear rules, known odds, limited possible outcomes. Real life, far more complex. Unknowns lurking around every corner. The probabilities aren't calculable.
Right. You don't know all the potential outcomes, let alone their likelihood.
So this raises an important question for you, the listener. How often do you unknowingly rely on simplified, game-like models when dealing with situations that have far more complex and unpredictable elements?
In your job, maybe. Your financial planning. Even relationships.
Could be anywhere. We build these seemingly logical models, these forecasts,
Yeah, all those risk assessments and 5-year plans.
and they often completely fail to account for those low-probability, high-impact black swan events that can just derail everything. They focus on the normal risks.
They assume mediocristan, basically.
Often, yes. Or they try to assign probabilities to things that are fundamentally unknowable. Then we have the subtle but powerful influence of silent evidence.
Silent evidence. What's that about?
This further skews our understanding of both the past and the future. Consider this. When things go spectacularly wrong, the people who experience the negative black swan often aren't around to share their experience.
Okay, give me an example.
Taleb gives the compelling example of ancient mariners, people who prayed to Poseidon when their ships were in trouble. Those who survived and made it back would attribute their survival to Poseidon's favor.
Building temples, making offerings.
Right, creating the impression that praying worked. But the far larger group, those whose ships sank despite praying, obviously couldn't report their findings from the bottom of the sea.
Their evidence is silent. Drowned.
Exactly. So the practical implication for you is to always consider what evidence you don't see, not just what you do see, what stories aren't being told.
Right. The drowned do not usually vote, as the saying goes. So we're only presented with the success stories, the visible outcomes, while the often much larger number of failures remain unseen and unheard. This creates all sorts of biases in our thinking, doesn't it?
Huge biases. Survivorship bias is everywhere.
We might attribute the phenomenal success of an entrepreneur solely to their genius and hard work, completely overlooking the countless others, maybe equally talented, whose ventures just didn't catch the right wave of unpredictable events.
Or got hit by an unexpected negative wave.
Yeah. It makes you wonder how much of what we consider best practices or wisdom is really just based on the visible successes and not on a full accounting of all the attempts, the failures.
It's a really sobering thought. And this silent evidence, this focus on survivors, contributes directly to what's known as the turkey problem.
Ah, yes, the turkey. Not a happy story for the turkey.
Not at all. Imagine a turkey who is fed and cared for every single day of its life by the farmer.
Seems like a pretty good deal for the turkey.
From the turkey's perspective, yes. With each passing day, the turkey's confidence that this routine will continue grows stronger and stronger. Its models of the world become increasingly certain. Life is good, it thinks.
Humans are friendly providers of delicious food.
Exactly. Then comes Thanksgiving.
Uh-oh.
For the turkey, this completely unpredicted event is a massive negative black swan, utterly devastating from its point of view.
But for the butcher?
It was entirely predictable, part of the plan all along.
So the crucial point here is that what constitutes a black swan is relative to knowledge and expectation.
Precisely. What might be a complete shock to one person, or turkey, could be entirely foreseeable to another who has a different perspective or more information, or different incentives.
Okay, so a key takeaway for you listening is maybe to constantly question your own assumptions and blind spots. What are you not seeing because of your current perspective or the data you have?
What Thanksgiving might be looming just outside your current model of the world?
It's a humbling question. So, okay, we've established that black swans happen. They have huge impacts. We're bad at predicting them because of narrative fallacies, ludic fallacies, silent evidence.
It seems quite daunting when you lay it all out.
It does. So given that predicting them seems fundamentally impossible, what's the actionable advice here? What can we actually do to navigate this world of uncertainty?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Taleb argues the focus has to shift completely away from prediction.
Towards what?
Towards preparation, robustness, and even anti-fragility, the ability to benefit from shocks.
Okay. How do we do that? He talks about the barbell strategy, right?
Yes, the barbell strategy is one concrete way to think about this.
Yeah.
At its core, it's about a dual approach. Think of a barbell. Heavy weights at the ends, nothing in the middle.
Right, extremes.
So you are extremely cautious and conservative in some areas, protecting yourself from major downside risk. Think very safe investments for the bulk of your capital.
Okay, the safe end of the barbell.
And then simultaneously, you take calculated, aggressive risks in other areas, but only where the potential upside is significant, even unlimited, and the downside is strictly limited and won't be catastrophic if it goes wrong.
So like investing a small amount in many high-risk startups where you can only lose what you put in, but one success could pay off massively.
Exactly that kind of thing. You avoid the middle ground of medium risks with moderate potential returns, which often carry hidden, unquantifiable black swan risks.
Interesting. So it's not about avoiding risk altogether.
No, definitely not. It's about managing your exposure in a smart way. Protect yourself from negative black swans while still being positioned to potentially benefit hugely from positive ones, those unexpected lucky breaks.
That makes sense. You survive the bad surprises and capitalize on the good ones.
As Taleb himself says, knowing that you cannot predict does not mean that you cannot benefit from unpredictability.
I like that. So the actionable insight here for you is maybe to think about how you can structure different parts of your life. Your finances, sure, but maybe also your career, your learning, even your personal development with this kind of barbell approach in mind.
Yeah, where can you afford to be ultra-conservative?
Yeah.
Protect your core stability. And where can you take some carefully considered shots at potentially transformative upside, knowing the loss is capped if it fails?
It requires a different kind of planning.
It does.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating a mindset of openness to possibilities, avoiding that rigid, narrow thinking, what Taleb calls tunneling, where you focus only on a narrow range of expected outcomes.
Like the turkey focusing only on the daily feeding.
Precisely. It also involves a different way of evaluating potential risks. Don't just ask how likely is this, ask how bad would it be if it happened.
Right. Focus on the magnitude of the potential impact, not just the perceived probability.
A low probability event with catastrophic consequences might warrant far more attention and preparation than a high probability event with only minor effects. Rank beliefs by the harm they could cause.
That feels counterintuitive to how we normally assess risk.
It often is. And
Hmm.
there's the practice of denarrating,
De-narrating, taking apart the stories.
sort of. It means consciously trying to reduce your reliance on the constant stream of news, expert opinions, and narratives, which can often be misleading noise and create a false sense of understanding or predictability.
So less cable news, more raw data.
Maybe. Or at least be skeptical of the narratives woven around the data. Focus on more fundamental empirical evidence where possible. What's actually happening versus the story someone is telling about it.
Okay, so the practical advice boils down to build systems, make choices that are robust, that can withstand unexpected shocks.
And maybe even benefit from them. And allow you to capitalize on unforeseen opportunities when they pop up. Be prepared, be open.
It's true that living in a world shaped by extremistan, by these winner-take-all dynamics, can sometimes feel inherently unfair.
It certainly can lead to outcomes that feel unjust.
The long tail phenomenon, where a small number of winners capture the vast majority of the rewards, that definitely contributes to significant inequalities we see.
Yeah, whether it's wealth, fame, or market share.
And our increasing global interconnectedness, that feels like a double-edged sword too, right?
Absolutely. It allows for amazing innovation and collaboration, but it also means that when crises do occur, financial, biological, informational, they can spread much more rapidly and have more severe cascading consequences.
Think about the fragility of complex systems. A disruption in one small part of a supply chain, for instance, can have knock-on effects far beyond what anyone initially anticipates.
Yeah, these systems lack the redundancy and buffers of simpler times, perhaps.
Mm.
An interesting contrast arises when you compare human-engineered systems with natural systems sometimes. Well, natural systems often have inherent limitations to their growth and impact built in. But human endeavors, particularly in our highly networked world, can scale massively and rapidly, leading to those extremist outcomes, both positive and negative.
And delays in human projects often get worse, not better.
Yeah, as some of your sources point out, there's often a nonlinear effect. The longer you wait, the longer you will be expected to wait, as initial setbacks or complexities can create a snowball effect of further delays.
Which just underscores the limitations of relying solely on expert predictions in these complex domains, right? Because they're often modeling based on assumptions that don't hold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially in fields dominated by extremistan dynamics, their track record is often, well, not great when it comes to predicting the big shifts.
So the key takeaway for you listening is maybe to recognize the inherent unpredictability in many of the complex systems that govern our world and adjust your expectations accordingly.
Don't expect neat linear progress or rely too heavily on forecasts in those areas.
So while the world can feel chaotic, understanding these underlying dynamics, it actually empowers you in a way.
How so?
Well, it allows you to approach it with a different perspective. Less frustration about failed predictions, maybe, and more focus on adaptation and resilience. It's about acknowledging the inherent limitations of our ability to predict in these highly uncertain environments.
And that leads us to a really powerful, maybe slightly philosophical, but I think very practical concluding thought, embracing amor fati.
Amor fati, the love of fate, from Stoicism.
Exactly, the Stoic philosophy of loving one's fate. Now, this isn't about being passive or fatalistic, just accepting bad outcomes.
It's not resignation.
No, it's more about cultivating a mindset of acceptance towards what you fundamentally cannot control. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who was actually a wealthy and influential figure himself, made it a practice to mentally prepare for the loss of everything he held dear, not because he wanted to lose it.
But to reduce its power over him if it did happen.
Precisely. It's about building inner resilience, reducing your emotional dependence on specific outcomes that are ultimately outside your control. If your well-being isn't tied to a specific prediction coming true,
You're less likely to be shattered when the unpredictable happens.
right. By acknowledging the inherent unpredictability of the world, the inevitability of surprises, you become, in a sense, more robust, maybe even anti-fragile, as Taleb would say. You could withstand shocks better.
So the ultimate actionable insight here, maybe wrapping it all together, is to focus on what you can control.
Yes, your preparation, your mindset, your values, your adaptability, how you react to events.
Rather than wasting energy trying to predict the unknowable future.
Exactly. Build that inner citadel, as the Stoics might say. Be prepared for fortune swings.
That feels like a very grounded way to deal with all this uncertainty.
I think so. Ultimately, navigating a world of black swans isn't about somehow getting better at predicting the future.
Because we probably can't, not for the big stuff anyway.
Right. It's about cultivating resilience, flexibility, and the ability to adapt to whatever comes our way, good or bad.
So the next time you encounter an unexpected event, maybe a personal setback, maybe a big global shift, remember our deep dive into black swans.
Pause and reflect.
Yeah, ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How does this fit or not fit my previous model of the world? And maybe most importantly, how can I adjust my approach, my strategies, my mindset to be better prepared for the inevitable surprises the world throws my way?
It's an ongoing process of learning and adapting.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing your sources and for joining us on this pretty fascinating deep dive into the world of black swans.
My pleasure. Lots to think about.
Definitely. Keep exploring.